Hello and welcome to our latest Autovista Group video, which we have produced together with Sam Livingstone from Car Design Research. I'm Autovista Group Chief Economist Christof Engelskirchen. You may have listened to part one of this two-part video, which was centered around the battle between tech companies and traditional car manufacturers. And in this part of the video, we will talk about touchscreens and how they start to rule the interior of the car. And when we thought about a title for this video, Sam actually suggested to call this the Emperor's New Clothes. And Sam, maybe for our international listeners who are not too familiar with this analogy, what did you mean by that?
Thanks, Christof. This is probably the hardest question I'll have to address or respond to for this session. The Emperor's New Clothes, it's a classic story, isn't it, where the Emperor is parading in front of his subjects and he is wearing no clothes, but he's been convinced that he's wearing the most amazing invisible suit, and he tries to get his immediate followers to buy into this, but it's transparently a lie. And I suppose that the reason for suggesting this as a title for this topic, which is fundamentally about in-car touchscreens, is that maybe there's some analogies there. Broadly, they're being held up as an amazing thing that is perhaps better than what we've seen before. But there's some questions there, aren't there? Which is fundamentally, are they better? Are they not perhaps in many respects less good? Are they not akin, if you like, to the Emperor's invisible suit, in as much as them being not actually what they purport to be in any respect? And I would not wish to suggest that touchscreens are bad in all respects at all, but I do have a view, which is that the industry is in an unusual situation where it's not able to perhaps have a dialogue and to recognise, in some respects, how they are manifestly not a total positive step forwards. I don't know what you think about them. Do you have a touchscreen in your car, Christof?
Yes. I have a touchscreen in my car, and it's interesting because it's the car has all the traditional ways of operating things with buttons and dials, and on top of it there is this touchscreen, which I'm personally not using. But this may be because I'm not the generation that is completely convinced about that touchscreens make it so easy to operate things. So I think there are two elements that I would suggest we talk about a bit here. One is there is a certain, it's very lean, it's very efficient, it's fast to put everything in a touchscreen if you know how to do it, because you can reprogram it, you can move things around, you can cut things out. And if you just imagine that the traditional car manufacturers wouldn't have to create for every function an individual button that needs to be put into the car, depending on how you configure your car. That takes a huge amount of complexity out, right? And tech companies have been moving towards that.
Yeah, and related, of course. So you're talking about complexity as an artifact, which inherently means it's complex from a user perspective, both their perception, this looks complex, this interior, but also it actually is complex to deal with. But I feel like there's an unspoken truth here too, which is that complexity costs money. So, where once upon a time some area of your instrument panel would have had 50 buttons, to just have one screen is going to be more cost effective as well. Exactly.
So it takes so much complexity out also in the production process, in the supply process. You don't need to have you don't need to source individual buttons anymore. For example, you don't need to have material discussions with product management, with designers. So it just makes the whole process more less complex, but also maybe less emotional. Maybe a bit more streamlined. Is that a risk potentially, Sam?
So in terms of the sort of why it's better, why actually these Emperor's New Clothes makes some sense from a production point of view is potentially a lower cost. Mm-hmm. You've also alluded to how in which it could be more easily updated. So these are sort of, if you like, brand side benefits. And I guess from the customer side, also, this lack of complexity that you've alluded to is inherently appealing, particularly perhaps if generations who were not previously familiar with more complex physical buttons and interfaces in particular. And also what sits around this little world of the in-car touchscreen, which, let's face it, the majority of the world is not so concerned with, is the ubiquity of the smartphone, of the tablet, and our sort of the wider world's fluency with interacting through a touchscreen interface in their domestic and normal non-car lives. And I guess the confluence of these sort of two core things together basically means like, well, there you go, this is the solution.
Yeah.
So it does make sense in all those respects, of course. But then again, when you back off that and say, well, if those are the core positives, what are the negatives? There is a fundamental negative, which is that to use a touchscreen, you have to sort of stick your digit out or your thumb, perhaps if you're a younger generation. Then if you're aware there's a difference between generations in their digit dexterity, you use one of your fingers or thumbs to touch something. You will have to look at your thumb to see where it's landing. And then to some degree, you will have to look at that to then see the tile's response or the particular area of the screen and how it's responding, to then have confirmation that you hit the right spot and that you have then facilitated some aspect of process.
Exactly. I mean, there are ways with traditional button-based concepts where you can just rest your hand somewhere, and then when you feel like it, when there is a window of opportunity for you to quickly look at the screen, you can touch it, or you can already go into a menu, while resting your palm on a dial, or while finding the button that you want to push to go into a menu. So these are, I agree, these are ergonomic advantages if you know how to operate the car. So we have the safety concern, and it has been well described. So if you're programming your navigational system on a touch screen while driving, that's a no-go, and you're going to have challenges with your insurance if you have an accident while doing this. So for me, the touchscreen has to be there have to be other ways to operate and the car with buttons, for example, on steering wheel, but also with a really powerful voice command system. And if those three things work in unison, for me, the touchscreen is. I mean, I have no problem. Yeah, personally, with my generation, I have maybe a bit of a problem with this, but it's going to go that way, and I can still adjust. I can still adapt. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so as you've just mentioned, that there's, if you like, the opportunity to have parallel ways to interact with the car. So therefore, you sort of sidestep any of the potential issues, and also you allow the customer to choose. I mean, I suppose from a purist perspective, as a sort of wearing a designer's hat as well, it's like designing one thing and then ensuring that there's like 2 or 3 different ways to get the same thing to operate. I mean, potentially you're covering bases, and this is a good thing, but it clearly adds complexity, potentially cost. And it certainly adds, effort from an R&D perspective. It feels like it perverts the purity of what it is. Surely, if there could be one good solution, one might have it there. And I think that the thing that slightly frustrates me with the touchscreen is that actually there's a sort of market familiarity with them because of our use of appliances which have touchscreens where they're not in driving application. So neither are you in a situation where you should not remove your eyes from the road, but also neither in a situation where you're moving around and actually locating your hand is challenging. And there's some other things in there as well, which are quite car specific. So our familiarity and our acceptance is based on a paradigm of using something outside of the vehicle. Now, that's not happened in cars before. We broadly, what's happened with cars and how they've developed and evolved in technologies as finding new and better solutions to fundamentally existing challenges, but existing challenges that sort of progress. This is actually the wholesale adoption of a solution set from outside of automotive and sort of, sticking it in the car. And yeah, as you've said, and as we've both said, I suppose, it does work in some respects, but not in all ways. But what it is fundamentally working is when somebody walks into a sales room or when they're at the point of purchase consideration, or even before they're in that, just the idea of it being there makes sense to them. So if you like, from a superficial marketing perspective, I think there's a real win. But when you look beyond that and you say to a car brand, well, look, hang on, aren't you not responsible for issues of safety, but also issues of sort of fundamental best solutions for this situation, disregarding safety? It's not just that. I don't know. I do question just the way in which they've shortcutted the design challenge all the way to the solution without necessarily looking at really what is that design challenge? Why would that be the best solution for it? I find it interesting also that we see in this very realm how some brands are backing off this. I mean, Honda with the latest Jazz, Citroen with the latest C4 have, if you like, removed the HVAC controls from the screen and put them back into core haptic controllers. And, you know, I think it's with good reason. And surely perhaps this is finding the balance as we evolve. But there's a bit of me that thinks a lot of the screen is about a superficial appeal. I mean, have you seen the Hyperscreen? I'm curious to know what you think of that. The Hyperscreen that was at CES from Mercedes. I mean, that's quite a screen, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's again a big challenge. It's less a challenge for the tech companies because they can just try it, and if it doesn't work, they change the approach, and everybody will still be be quite happy with their approach because they have a bit of a trial and error advantage in approaching things. The traditional car manufacturers, they also need to jump on that, on that train. They need to get ahead with it. They need to jump on board because if you want to have a more techy flavor in your brand and your design, touchscreen is the easy way to get there, right? And if you need to take out cost of production, you need to get rid of buttons. You need to take complexity out, and you still are more complex than the tech companies. So I think what we will see with touchscreens is that if some of the manufacturers are taking really this thing seriously and they can afford it, that yes, some buttons will stay out of the touchscreen. Yeah, I think that would be good from an economic perspective. But it's a question of whether they can afford it, and clearly the tech companies are not doing it, right? And so they have a cost advantage in this regard. Hyperscreen, I was to be honest, I was quite impressed because first I thought it's just a new name for a bigger screen, but it's a complete redesign of the entire dashboard. It's quite daring, because this is not a tech company, a classic tech company approach where they just put in a touch screen, not looking so much maybe in design perfection. Yeah. Again, maybe something you can comment on, but what Daimler does with the Hyperscreen is way out there, and I think if they can master the software challenges around it, then it's quite great. If it's just if it's just average, if they are struggling to get the software and the responsiveness and the ergonomics to that level of a Google and Apple operating system. If they fail to do that, it's going to be a huge problem. Yeah, but I mean, let's hope that they can manage. I like it. I think it's cool.
Yeah, and I guess also it builds on some element of leadership they've got. MBUX is properly, maybe not leading in all respects, but it's fundamentally got the attention of so much of the market of other car brands, and not least in China, of course. I mean, there is this different relationship with in-car technology according to region, as well as according to different types of people. And not only have you got a slightly younger profile of car user in China, but you've also got, a fundamentally different relationship with advanced technology, where this sort of thing I think will be embraced. And it's not just that as an older European person, I'm trying to be Luddite about it, but I do, I suppose, feel like, where is it appropriate to put the handbrake on and say, look, hang on a minute, since when does the car interior need to have this much light coming out of it? Since when is it that we need to have whatever this information is bombarding us to this extent? If we sort of back away and think, okay, so let me just imagine you've just checked into your hotel. Let's make a presumption it's not for business. Are you turning on the TV? Now, I imagine that 10 and 15 years ago, you may well have turned on the TV because this was some way in which you distract yourself from your day. It might be entertainment. It might be the news. It might be the weather. To be honest, as you check into a hotel now, as long as your phone is connected to Wi-Fi or your laptop is, you're probably not using that TV. Mm-hmm. So why is it that when you get into a car, you want to have more screen? I would suggest to you that there's a sort of tipping point that we must be at now. Are we at peak screen? I'm not sure. But I sort of feel like that actually the idea of having so much, if you like, entertainment, information, screen, light, push the amount of stuff being pushed at you by car brands, I sort of feel like any minute now we're going to have a tipping point where we back off this. It's like, hang on a minute, I don't need this. I have got my phone if I need it, but actually for most of my journeys, most of the time, I need very little information. And I certainly don't wish to have it forced at me. So if I do have it, I will elect to have it myself. And maybe I'm also driving a vehicle which is intelligent enough to provide me with just the information I need, as opposed to bombarding me with so much. I mean, once upon a time, you get into a car, you'd have a speedometer, a tachometer, a fuel gauge, ammeter for the back. You'd have all sorts of dials telling you stuff that you kind of didn't need to know. Clearly now, you can just have the information you need. We don't have all of that stuff anymore. And with the exception of having navigation and a few other things from time to time where the circumstances require it, actually, I put it to you that for the most part within a car, as a driver and certainly as a passenger, do you really want to have all that stuff? I mean, clearly at the moment we're all like, well, it's an amazingly big screen, but is that actually solving a need, or is it just novelty?
And this is the thing that I was trying to allude to earlier. You're saying you get into a car and you have your phone and you might be happy. Let's assume the car at some point will be driving a bit more autonomously, and you can watch a video on your phone, on your iPad or whatever smart device you have. But you could also watch it on on the screens that have been put into the car, if they are good, right? If they are responsive, if it's easy for you to log in. So these are technology components that are important. And I can give you a counter example. When I go into a hotel room on vacation, I mean, usually not on business travel, because you spend your time doing other things. But on vacation, I do tend to check out whether there is for example, a Netflix app in the TV, right? Because it's a bigger screen. I log in with my username, password, and then I can watch some of my shows on TV. So in that respect, it is working for me. And if the inbuilt screens are better, are good, and big enough, then there is an advantage of carrying your phone and iPad in it. Yeah. And another pro and con here may be that if you have screens in the car that can be configured also later in the life of the car, and these cars are on the road maybe for 10 years, maybe longer, it could be interesting that in 10 years you might have a completely different setup, a very individualized, a very individual setup that is responsive to how you change, to how the next buyer changes, and that could make the car more attractive as a used car, and that has higher remarketing values, lower leasing rates. So there is a whole virtuous circle potentially in this. Or we go the other way, that the car is so quickly outdated because the technology is so quickly outdated that it's almost impossible to sell. So what's your
view I think
on
that's
that?
A nice thing, and just to sort of maybe push unnecessarily the hotel analogy, it's almost like you get to you're almost advocating, instead of having a screen that's built into the TV, you would almost have a PowerPoint and a socket or something. I mean, that's not your exact words, Christof, but it's the suggestion that you could plug and play your screen solution to be up to date and to be aligned to what you want as a user to some degree. And I think there's a real logic to that. I mean, I guess from a car producer perspective, it might decouple you from the money of producing something which has an amazing screen in it. I'm not sure, and I've not really scrutinized the hyperscreen fully, but my sense is that it's exceedingly integrated. And that right now and for the next year and possibly 2 and maybe even up to 5 years, that will look quite impressive. But it very much looks like it's, the screen is baked into the car there. Now, in some respects, back in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, radios used to be baked into furnishing items, and to be honest, they decoupled quite quickly, didn't they, with the transistor radio. And now, if you like, we've got a different thing, which is, fundamentally a wireless speaker. Now, I do wonder with the hyperscreen, where actually in some respects it's a bit radiogram, where it's almost like it is become a bit of furniture in the way they've done it. And it does make sense. Maybe it's a horse they're betting on. Maybe built-in obsolescence isn't bad, if you like, from a brand perspective. But I feel that it's, an MBUX today is potentially, specifically that hyperscreen. Give it 5 years or 10 years time, it does look like it won't have the. It would be great, in my view, to have your world where you're able to change these things. Where if you took out your screen, your car wouldn't look like there's a gap in it. Where if you put a large screen in, it would actually work. And for your Netflix analogy, I think that's a perfect example of how that might work.
There's this. You're fully aware that all these tech devices, your smartphones, they change adapters probably every 3-4 years. So I have devices where I cannot put my phone in anymore because the way they were connected has changed, or the way that they now need to connect has changed. So there is and those devices look really outdated. So if you have a car with a plug and play capability, it may be outdated quickly because suddenly Apple or Samsung changes the adapter and it doesn't fit anymore, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have some sort of let's say inbuilt capabilities from OEMs.
Yeah? I guess so. Yeah, and I think that's always going to be a challenge. Although I put it to you, we're about to be in a world which is adapter free. Christof, the next iPhone won't have a port, as I understand it. We will be induction charging things ubiquitously. And I think, is it the MagSafe, the new sort of connection way in which the Apple works? That's going to come through for that brand. Yeah. We've got the brands that are doing some things. So the actual, if you like, little plugs and ports and holes and connectors, I think are going to fade away. Your point still stands, of course, because whatever you're going to use will have to have some sort of proprietary technology. Having said that, you look at the way in which the microphone plugs into computers, or has done up until about now. That hasn't changed the technology set for for 60, 70, 80 years. I think that was in the 1920s, 1930s that it was designed, and the newer 3.5 plug was like 1950s, 1960s. So there are some standards which persevere. Yeah. I put to you that whilst what you flag is a justifiable challenge that would need to be ensured, it's like that's not an insurmountable problem to ensure that somehow you've got a sort of universal way in which you can accommodate a screen of a variety of different connection points, and indeed behind the sort of IP to have an access maybe for a technician to update that if they need to in 10 years' time. But at the moment, I don't think people are really trying to design that. Actually, just to sort of back up to the beginning of our conversation, I think car brands are, if you like, obliged to be in a horse race called more screens, more screen real estate, more screen functionality. We have to hit you with more stuff. If we have less stuff, we are less. And we are selling less. Why would we do that? So they're sort of being pushed into this situation where it has to be more things in more screens, which take up more space. And at the moment, it's quite hard, if you like, to create a clear picture of how you add value by having maybe less screens and less stuff and less screen real estate, unless you get to a point of maturity where maybe voice or other ways of communicating can, if you like, protect the functional sophistication and the ability to realize a multitude of different ways in which we interact. But for the most users, most of the time, the amount of, as a proportion of the different interfaces within one's car, I would suggest most journeys you're using significantly less than 10%. And actually, for many users who are not car industry people, who are not car enthusiasts, they're very, very small boundary of ability to access in-car functionality. And the screen doesn't help, not least because not just the touch, it's the menus. And so it's the need to know what's happening without even being able to see it. So I don't know. I guess I'm quite negative about screens, mostly in a vocal way, because I don't think that voice is there, and I think there is a need for that voice there, not just to say they're bad, they're wrong, and not just to say we need to go back to where we were, but to acknowledge that they have that they don't solve all the problems, and that there's many positive new ways of solving problems which would result in a better product for users. And I just think that it's something which is somehow cannot be spoken about. And the emperor is not wearing any clothes, Christof.
It's a good transition, and I think to summarize, and this was quite a complex discussion, but to summarize, there is no way out of the touchscreen trend. There are safety concerns that can be addressed and have to be addressed. So there is no question about it. So there need to be other ways to operate a car besides a touchscreen. So voice command, we talked about that, and maybe some dials left for the most important functionalities. And there's this third element here that you touched on quite a bit. Maybe we are overdoing things. Maybe we're creating a bit too much touchscreen world in a car where it's not adding a benefit from an ergonomic perspective, and not adding a benefit from a, let's say, from a design or good touch and feel perspective, because it's just getting a bit overboard potentially. Plus, we have this element of after sales and repair cost and there's a question mark as well. Maybe we have time for one last question, Sam, because I have this on my list. I noted this some time ago. Maybe others have as well. All the brands, all the traditional car manufacturing brands are seeming to change logos these days. They become, simpler, less 3D, also decluttered. Some look more like apps now. Have you encountered this trend, and what's your take on it?
Yeah, for sure, I have. And broadly, I think it's really a positive thing. I'm maybe not aligned with each brand's development and how it's worked out. I think some of them maybe have done things which don't necessarily make full sense in terms of fundamentally in terms of how legible they are. I think there's some brands which have migrated from a position where maybe it looked a bit old-fashioned, but it was super distinct, and they've now got something which is clearly in the vernacular of 21st century, but actually is not so clearly.
And Sam, should we give an example maybe of some brands that have recently changed? So I have Kia, for example. They had a really longish name, and now it's basically just a couple of shapes that they're showing.
I think BMW is one of the better ones. There's a whole rash of them, aren't there? And for some reason they're not all coming to the top of my mind. I mean, even Rolls-Royce have actually updated their Flying Lady, which not many people sort of see or notice.
Okay,
and I think,
I have to check.
I think a lot of the reasons that this has happened has been not so much, if you like, for the hard car product, but for the way in which communications are so much more going through a light-based, screen-based form. Yeah. So inherently being two-dimensional, inherently being able to work on a smaller app-like scale makes sense. So yeah, they're all migrating away from a representation of potentially sort of a mascot in an old school world, or badge and a physical item, towards something which is more clearly flat. I think there's also a sort of connotational relationship there where they are sort of speaking more like a tech brand in that respect. And I think that that's a sort of a migration of identity they're all trying to embrace, so they don't look like a sort of an old-fashioned big chrome thing from the 20th century. They're trying to look much more aligned with the other ones. So that's interesting. One thing though that, and we shouldn't talk about this for too long, I'm sure. So we're seeing that in the graphical logo marks to give the sort of full parlance to what we're describing. But what we're also seeing, and most people don't make the connection, but you have consistent imagery that sits on vehicles also. BMW's grille has been a lot in the media recently, not all for the right reasons, but you've got these fundamental two kidney shapes. It's double kidney, and this is a core mark signifier. It's a graphical mark for that brand. It has a three-dimensional form, perhaps, but fundamentally it is communicating I'm a BMW, very much as the BMW roundel is. And clearly other brands have this too. It's not just the Audi rings, it's the grille, it's the other elements as well. And these design signatures and these, if you like, brand signifiers, design elements that signify brand. I don't know that there's actually as much awareness as there should be within the automotive industry, within other industries perhaps, but certainly within the design community, that it's not just being consistent about your application of logo. It's not just about understanding how that might map forwards and relate to future marketplace. It's also about managing, preserving, project and developing the other signifiers, because there's a whole suite. It's not just logo and then car design. It's a whole load of things in between. And I think that's been slightly overlooked, which is a missed opportunity in my view.
So times are interesting. Times are more exciting maybe than they used to be before, and a lot of it is coming by the disruption that the tech companies have created for car manufacturers. So it's getting fascinating. It's getting good. But we have come to an end with this part 2 of our video. And thank you, Sam, again for joining us in this format and for making it very conversational, I hope. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, Google, and Amazon Music. And also, please check out our YouTube page with all the latest videos. And last but not least, sign up for the Autovista Group daily email at autovistagroup.com/sign up. And goodbye.